Of all the franchises to never come to a Sega console, they rarely get any bigger than Metal Gear. From the MSX original in 1987 to Metal Gear Solid 2 in 2001, 4 games were released while Sega made hardware, and not once did any of them come to a Sega console. Unless, of course, you count Metal Gear Solid on Dreamcast, which, given its emulation, you probably shouldn't. But now, we have a port of the original Metal Gear game on the Sega Mega Drive, thanks to the prolific homebrew coder Hoffman. Yes, this legendary programmer is back at it again with his third Sega-related homebrew port of 2025. So, join me, Dan the Mega Driver of the Sega guys, as I take a look at Hoffman's Metal Gear on the Sega Mega Drive. We've had flirtations with the Metal Gear series on Sega consoles before. Officially, there's Snatcher, which has connections to the series, including your little robotic helper. There's the aforementioned Dreamcast disc that lets you play an emulated Metal Gear Solid PlayStation disc on your Sega Dreamcast. And then there's the extremely impressive demos of Metal Gear Solid on the Sega Saturn and Metal Gear Solid 2 on the Sega Dreamcast, courtesy of our friend Frogball. But so far, we've never had a full-fledged complete title from the series playable on Sega hardware that you could play from beginning to end. Until now. Fresh off of his Neo Geo ports of arcade classic Shinobi and Golden Axe, Hoffman has been at it again, his penchant for pulling out high quality ports of classic games so quickly, to be honest, is pretty astounding. In this instance, he has ported the original Metal Gear title from the MSX2 to Sega's 16-bit classic console. Well, indirectly at least. You see, Hoffman has actually been here before. He originally ported Metal Gear to the Commodore Amiga. Historically, an Amiga port had been announced, but it never actually materialised. Hoffman then ported the title from the MSX from the ground up, converting that Z80 code to 68,000 assembly for the port and adding a number of Amiga-based enhancements. If you have an Amiga, suffice to say, you should really check that version out. And so, the Sega Mega Drive port is actually based off of the Amiga port, according to Hoffman's notes on his itch.io site. My assumption would be that the conversion to 68,000 code would have made the port from Amiga to Mega Drive, considering that they both share the same Motorola 68,000 CPU, is actually a little less intense than it was originally from the MSX. That being said, ports between those two systems were anything but straightforward. Hey, just check out our old discussion on the subject from a few years back. Quite a few Amiga to Mega Drive ports ended up with very different games. So, on the game itself then, if you've never played the original Metal Gear or any in the series, here's a brief summary. Metal Gear is an action game with a focus on stealth over all-out combat. This original game plays at a quasi-overhead angle as you guide the game's protagonist, Solid Snake, through the heavily fortified enemy base known as Outer Heaven. You guide Solid Snake through the fairly non-linear play area, avoiding enemies and cameras, picking up items and equipment, saving prisoners, and ultimately working your way through the compound security until you battle the final boss. If you get detected, moving away from enemies into the next screen can sometimes help, but if you're spotted by a camera, then the enemies will chase and swarm you until you can take them all out, or until they gun you down into a game over. The game has infinite continues and a save function, but it presents a fair challenge, requiring you to think and remember when and where to use certain items. You can even find Snake's patented cardboard box for him to hide in. As you get into the game, it's here that Hoffman's enhancements come into the light. Just like his Amiga port, there are multiple scripts to choose from, including the original Japanese MSX text, the original PAL release translation, and the new English remix, as well as the Spanish translation. The audio has been redone by Hoffman, Ice Dragon D, and Engelbart. There's also support for the 6-button controller, the extra buttons allowing you to quickly access the weapons and equipment menus, which is a lifesaver in tense situations. the game is still an absolute joy to play on the console, and Hideo Kojima's excellent design still holds up well today, with intelligent, well thought out stage layouts and game mechanics. Hoffman's port, just like his Commodore Amiga version, runs flawlessly. There is absolutely no sprite flicker or any slowdown. You can even play with the standard Mega Drive 3 button pad, and it plays quite well in that respect because of how the shortcuts are mapped intelligently to combinations of the A button and the direction buttons. But really, that 6 button support really makes this 8-bit classic feel like it has been modernised for this 16-bit hardware. Speaking of modernising it for the hardware, that goes beyond the controls, beyond the sound and the translation, to of course the visuals, which see some tweaks as well. It's not comprehensive, and for the most part this is the MSX2 original that you know and love, but there are some cool little updates that really make a difference. Most notable are the character portraits during the codec scenes. Anyone who has played a Metal Gear game will know that this series has a focus on narrative and game drama via the aforementioned codec and the cutscenes, and the updated character portraits alongside the remixed translation adds another dimension to the proceedings. There may be purists out there that prefer the MSX originals, but personally, I'm a big fan of the changes here. The updated character art was done by Tony Galvez originally for the Amiga port of Metal Gear, and of course that carries its way over to this Sega Mega Drive release quite nicely. Overall, this is yet another excellent conversion from Hoffman, who has already been extremely prolific with 3 games released so far in 2025. Metal Gear itself holds up extremely well, and it's fantastic to have a version of Metal Gear on a Sega console. It's also extremely rare that Kojima's original game has seen a native port on any system. Metal Gear was initially developed as an MSX exclusive, but a version was created for the Nintendo Entertainment System a little later. That version was done without Hideo Kojima's consent or input, and it featured dramatic changes to its design and layout, and was later on publicly disowned by Hideo Kojima. This NES version also featured changes that made its way into the Commodore 64 port of the game, albeit with even more changes made specifically for that hardware. In the modern day, you can of course play this original game via the various Metal Gear compilations, it usually being an extra on almost every version of Metal Gear Solid 3 Subsistence, but those are all emulations of the MSX game and not native ports, nor do they update any of the mechanics for systems beyond the MSX2 or NES. As such, this is what makes this particular port of Metal Gear so special. It's been honed for 16-bit hardware, with some specific considerations for the Sega Mega Drive release over the Commodore Amiga version on which it is based. And that makes this game such an easy recommend for both Sega fans who may be new to the series and Metal Gear veterans alike. Metal Gear is a classic, and while it was Metal Gear Solid that pushed the series to commercial critical mass, it's this original game that established the foundations and started Snake and Kojima on an adventure that would span the next few decades. So make sure you check out Hoffman's itch.io page in the description below to try it out. Until next time, this has been Dan the Mega Driver of the Sega Guys, and I will see you on the Sega side.